The Halloween party was already in full swing when my wife and I arrived. It was hard to look away from her toned body, which was well shown off by her tight, jet-black Catwoman costume. She was beautiful. Even after having 2 kids with my parents for the weekend, Alicia was really hot. I have to admit that sometimes I forget how attractive she really is. I was dressed like a pirate. Original? Sexy? Of course not. However, I wasn't bad. Alicia quickly kissed me on the cheek and went to chat with the other guests. I headed to the drinks area where several of my buddies were having a very loud debate. They seemed hot and tense. As soon as I was within earshot, I realized why the tension was so high. It was one of those debates that challenges your intellect, forces you to think outside the box. Who will win, Hulk or Superman? I had to shake my head at the pointlessness of such debates. You'd think that in a room full of grown, intelligent men, there would be topics of conversation that wouldn't be so stupid. Everyone knows Superman is the obvious choice. Why was this even discussed? Be that as it may, I have decided to participate in this monumental debate by offering my expert opinion, which I have gathered from a scientific point of view through extensive research conducted during my childhood. This included spending hours looking at Marvel and DC comics. Since my knowledge clearly exceeded that of anyone else, I was confident that my contribution would end the debate once and for all. Surprisingly, the other participants did not consider my arguments absolute. I only managed to make the conversation louder. But this is what happens when you mix grown men with beer. You get a bunch of teenagers burping, farting, and sometimes wrestling. You'd think that a room full of scantily clad nurses, cat women, and various animals would draw our attention to base thoughts. We all had to finally agree to postpone the discussion. There was too much beer and too much fun. I planned to stay relatively sober since I knew Alicia wasn't going to take us home. We just got here and I could see she was already having a really good time. She was sitting on the couch next to her best friend Susie. Susie was also dressed as Catwoman. And yes, she paid as much attention to her costume as Alicia did. Alicia and Susie have been inseparable since middle school. As children, they lived on the same block. They are so similar that the only way they can coexist in the same place at the same time is either as best friends or as fierce enemies. They talked the same, dressed the same, did almost the same things, and even looked the same. Both sets of parents were mom and dad for them. A running joke when they were teenagers was that one of their mothers had a set of twins and gave the spare child to another family. The only mystery was to find out who the real mother was. By the way, they both hated that joke. Susie was married to a guy named Dominic. They got married 2 years before Alicia and I did. At that time, we had been married for 6 years. You would think that because the 2 girls were similar in many ways, they would marry the same guys. Wrong. Susie's husband is my complete opposite. I'm a person who doesn't do much physical labor at work. Dominic works with his hands all day. I am the district manager for 6 local restaurants that my company owns. While I may not be a suit and tie person, I am usually, at worst, businesslike. In case you're wondering, I'm not a nerd or a weirdo. I played baseball in high school and also took up boxing in college. However, my boxing was more of a hobby than a career, but it kept me in shape. I admit that after I got married and settled into family life, my time in the gym decreased a bit, or a lot. But I wasn't overweight, and I was in shape. Dominic, on the other hand, works in a local factory. I'm not sure what his official specialty is, but I know it involves lifting heavy stuff many times a day for 8 to 10 hours. Not to mention he practically lives in the gym. As you can imagine, he is very muscular. While my hair stays short and neat, his hair is long and pulled back into a ponytail. His beard completes his image as an Aztec warrior. Dominic looks like Drogo from Game of Thrones, while I look more like Don Draper from Mad Men. I never really warmed to him. I didn't dislike him, per se. But we didn't really have a connection that would make us close friends, or any other type of friend. To me, he was Susie's husband. Since Susie was my wife's best friend, I saw him sometimes. I have never looked for it in any other context, nor have I had the desire to. I'm sure he felt the same way about me. This night he was, of course, dressed as Tarzan. Really? It was cold outside, and he came to the party wearing a loincloth. I call it being a jerk. Defined. Actions that can only be construed as referring to him being a jerk. Anyway, Tarzan was hanging out with the women, as he always did at these kinds of parties. He was very flirtatious and often bordered on inappropriateness. However, neither woman seemed to mind. His thinly veiled sexual innuendos often made them giggle and blush rather than slap him. Even Alicia. It really burned me. One would imagine that Susie would find this behavior awkward. I know Alicia would have done this if it weren't for me. However, Susie simply laughed along with them. Sometimes she would playfully pat him on the shoulder and say, "Dominic, stop it." But she never really admonished him or even looked at him angrily. She looked proud that women lusted after her husband. Dominic was in a playful mood tonight. He had drunk enough alcohol to lower his already slight inhibitions, so his flirting was palpable. Single women, married women, it didn't matter. He grabbed their breasts, groped their asses, and rubbed their crotches. I have seen several husbands become angry when their wives became the object of such attention, but no one reacted to it. Maybe they were afraid of him. Maybe they were drunk. Maybe they just didn't want to make a scene. I don't know. However, I kept my ears open whenever he was around Alicia. One act of being a jerk to my wife and we'd be out of here. Alicia must have sensed my anxiety because she came over to me. "Are you having fun, Greg?" she asked loudly because of the music. I nodded my head and took a sip of beer. I watched her sway to the music as she stood next to me. I noticed that her gaze shifted to Tarzan. Without realizing it, she silently assessed his body. I felt something I didn't want. Her lust. I admit it. I started to get jealous. What idiot dresses up like Tarzan when it's cold outside? Alicia snapped out of her trance and turned to me. "You know Dominic, honey. He should always be the center of attention." I chuckled and took another sip of my beer. It suddenly lost its taste. Alicia noticed the change in my sour mood. "Honey, don't tell me you're jealous." "Why would I be jealous of him? I don't feel the need to go out naked to attract women." Alicia laughed dismissively. "Of course not, honey," she said as her attention turned back to the asshole. As the evening wore on, more alcohol was consumed. This made people even less shy. After a while, Dominic and his loincloth took a back seat as I hung out with my real friends. At some point during the night, Dominic started making advances toward Alicia. I didn't even notice it until I went looking for her because I hadn't seen her for a long time. I found her in the kitchen, with Dominic. They stood close and talked in low voices. It was too intimate for my liking, and my jealousy instantly reared its head. Dominic saw me first, and I saw him retreat a fair distance. Alicia must have sensed the change in climate because she turned around and saw me too. She tried to smile at me warmly, but it seemed forced. "Hi, darling." "I was just looking for you," she said quickly. Too fast. "Really, Alicia? I was in the same place all night." My tone sounded accusing, although I tried to hide it. She visibly shuddered. Dominic quickly and quietly left us there alone. "Are you mad at me, honey?" she asked, her voice dripping with innocence. "What were you two talking about? I find you in this corner with him, whispering like two teenage girls who have a secret. What the hell is going on?" "Honey, stop it. Nothing happens between me and Dominic. He was just being flirty, as always. Nothing to get your panties in a bunch over." "Are my panties in a bunch? What the hell is that supposed to mean?" A smirk appeared on her face, but it quickly disappeared. It gave way to an expression of sympathy and concern. "I'm just a little drunk, honey. Don't mind me." With these words, she patted me on the cheek and left. Dominic and Alicia were not seen together for the rest of the night. Believe me, I watched, like a hawk. In fact, it was almost as if they were actively avoiding each other. I did see them exchange mysterious glances, but that was all. That was enough. More than enough to make my spidey senses tingle. I was starting to feel awkward. Very awkward. I had to take a break. The beer was starting to take effect, and I had to go relieve the pressure. So I went upstairs and went about my business. When I came out of the bathroom, I ran straight into Dominic. It was as if he had followed me here and was waiting for me. "Do you have a problem with me, Greg?" he asked, slurring his words. His eyes looked into mine menacingly, as if he was trying to intimidate me. What? I asked. This moment seemed surreal to me. In fact, something was a little off about this whole night. I asked if you had a problem with me. You always look down on me. You, with your luxury car and luxury house, always waving your money around. Do you think you're better than me? If this conversation doesn't make sense to you, you're not alone. I had no idea where this shit came from. You're drunk, Dominic. Go home before you say something you'll regret, I said, pushing past him. Said something like what? Something like sleeping sweetly with your pretty wife. Now he has my attention. I turned and walked towards him until we were millimeters apart. Shut up. Don't make me act like my suit. I'll kill you. Leave my wife out of any of your sick fantasies. He looked at me and grinned. Fantasies are for something that didn't happen, idiot. I have memories. The last word sounded like thunder. And so it was. This puts an end to this discussion completely. His words reached me. You're full of crap, asshole, I said, although I wasn't as sure as I would have been before the party. What about the mole on her thigh? Or the fact that she's not a real blonde? Of course, you can't say that now, since she tidied up her... That was the last thing he said. The only other sounds that could be heard were the sickening thud of bone on bone that a fist makes as it connects firmly to the jaw, followed by the sound of 195 pounds punching through the drywall. I walked down the stairs like a raging bull. Once I was downstairs, I found Alicia. She rushed towards me. Greg, what? The question froze on her lips. One look at me, and she knew I knew. Her wide eyes filled with tears confirmed everything Dominic had said. Oh my God, someone call 911. Dominic is unconscious. I can't resurrect him. I heard screams from above. I don't know who it was. I did not care. I just stood there and looked at Alicia as if I had never known her. Maybe that's how it was. People began to climb the stairs to see what was happening. I just stood there, staring at Alicia, looking for the woman I married. Honestly, at that moment, I didn't care whether Dominic was alive or not. What the hell did you do to my husband? I heard a scream come from behind me, and then small fists hit my back. I ducked to get away from Susie, who was swinging at me desperately. Someone grabbed her and pulled her back. Greg, what the hell? Asked my friend Richard. He was the one throwing the party. The wall, which now had a Dominic-sized hole in it, belonged to him. I ignored him completely and turned to Susie. Did you know that your husband slept with Alicia? Susie instantly went quiet and stopped trying to attack me. She looked at me as if that explained everything, but she wasn't angry. She didn't call me a liar. Most importantly, she didn't look at Alicia. She just looked at me like she knew. And now, me too. I felt a gentle hand on my shoulder. Greg, we need to talk, but not here. I turned around and gave Alicia the coldest look I could muster. At that moment, such rage rose within me that I had never experienced. Blinding, white-hot rage. It was so strong that tears flowed from my eyes, although I didn't actually cry. It was as if the tears were some kind of release valve keeping me from exploding. He woke up. I heard a shout from above. Susie left Alicia and I and flew up the stairs to be next to her Fallon jungle boy. My anger began to subside. The grim reality of what was happening suddenly became apparent. What if I killed Dominic even though I didn't mean to? One moment of anger could doom me to lifelong consequences. I may already be charged with assault. My career that I worked so hard for could have been ruined because I lost it to a drunken idiot. The drunk idiot who slept with my wife. Greg, come on, honey. Let's get out of here. We need to talk. Us? No, Alicia. You are going home with your boyfriend and his wife. I'm getting out of here. I pushed past her and headed for the front door. Alicia ran after me in desperation and grabbed me. Greg, you won't leave me here. We're going home and we're going to talk. Can you hear me, damn it? You're not going to upstage me anymore. Her face was streaked with tears. She was a mixture of furious and incredibly sad, if that makes any sense. I have no idea what the hell she was supposed to be angry about. I can't deal with you, Alicia. Do not go home. I could already go to jail for assault. I don't want to add domestic violence to this. Fuck you, Greg. Fuck you. Do you want to hit me? Do it, chicken shit. At least you won't ignore me. Damn, this will be the first time you touch me in weeks. As she said this, she poked my chest with her finger. Her anger was growing rapidly, and I had no idea why. She was the deceiver here. The only one who had the right to be angry was me. Is this your reason? Because I don't come home and caress you every night? Is this your fucking excuse? Is that your bullshit reason for cheating with this asshole? She didn't answer me in words. Her defiant gaze spoke for her. For your information, Alicia, I work for a living. I don't have a husband to pay my bills for me. Maybe if you got a fucking job, you'd know what it's like to come home tired. That's when I remembered we have an audience. And believe me, they were all ears. The only thing missing was the buckets of popcorn in their hands. Alicia was actually making fun of me. Poor Greg. He is too tired to make love to his wife. And yet he finds time to sit in front of his computer and watch adult movies every night. Maybe if you stopped looking for silicone Barbie dolls on the internet and paid more attention to your wife, she wouldn't have to cry to her best friend about her husband not being interested in her anymore. By this time, Alicia was practically screaming at the top of her lungs. Her fists were clenched at her sides, and her tear-stained face reflected pain and anger. For me, this was the final blow. I couldn't have been more humiliated than I was in that moment. I didn't have a smart answer or any kind of retaliation. I tried to say something in response, but nothing came out. Everyone around me, my friends and neighbors, were looking at me. Their faces did not hide how they felt as they watched this exchange. Shock, disgust, sympathy, entertainment. I had no choice but to turn on my heels and disappear into the night. Alicia's cry of despair followed me until I started the engine and drove away. This story is based on real events. In case you were wondering, I'm not Greg. In this story, I'm Richard, the guy who threw the Halloween party. Yes, I own a Dominic-sized hole next to my daughter's room. I spoke from the perspective of the main character because I felt it would make the audience feel the anger and humiliation that Greg experienced. I had to put myself in his shoes when I wrote this. My wife and I couldn't help but talk about it. In fact, it has been a topic of discussion in our house ever since. I know it's wrong to get so caught up in a situation like this, but it's like a train wreck. We can't help but wonder about things we don't know. Susie wasn't angry when Greg told her that Alicia was sleeping with Dominic. So she knew. Was it a threesome or some other situation? Honestly, a threesome with these two would rival any adult movie. How long does this last? I also saw the looks Alicia and Dominic shot at each other at the party. There was definitely something there. Maybe I'm just overthinking this. Maybe not. It was very clear that Greg was neglecting Alicia sexually, maybe even in more areas. Was this an excuse for cheating? I don't think so. Does this explain why she cheated? Absolutely. Women whose sexual advances are consistently rejected will be more tempted to have an affair, especially if the husband shows sexual interest in other women besides her. Even watching adult movies can be considered cheating if it makes your spouse feel betrayed and inadequate. By the way, Alicia is sexy as hell in real life. In my opinion, a man would have to be dead not to show any interest in her, but this proves the truth of the saying, for every beautiful woman, there is a man who is tired of having sex with her. The most important question, what will happen next? At the moment, the four of them are keeping quiet about the current situation, but something like this cannot remain silent for long. It's just a matter of time. Although this story is based on a true story, I did not witness everything. I had to take creative license with some things. For example, I didn't hear the exact conversation that took place when Greg hit Dominic. I heard from others. The exact wording had to be embellished. I obviously didn't know what was going on in Greg's head. I knew what would be going on in my head if it were me. I just accepted it. I feel for him and the choices he faced. Alicia treated him very unfairly, regardless of her reasons. I'm not sure if I'm looking for reconciliation or divorce in this situation, I have to be honest. Of course, I'm somewhat biased, since Greg is a friend of mine. And of course, Superman would completely defeat the Hulk. I agree with Greg on this. Thermal vision, flight, super speed, No competition, unless there's kryptonite in there, neither here nor there. Mr. Kirkson, they're calling you on line 1. Who is it, Betty? Mr. Ford is calling for you, sir. Greg? Greg called me. I've been trying to contact him since the explosion at my Halloween party. Until now, he, his wife, and 2 other lovers had remained silent. No one heard a sound from them. Of course, there were questions. So many questions. I mean, how could this not happen? The showdown was so public and humiliating, even cruel. It had all the elements you would want in the best drama. Sex, violence, betrayal, and the epic showdown between David and Goliath. Only this time, Goliath had a glass jaw and wrote a drunken check that was too expensive for him, and David cashed it, with real hatred. Connect him to me, Betty. Sir, he sounds a little upset. Well, yes, his wife actually publicly humiliated him. If he weren't upset, I'd be a little worried. Thank you, Betty. I'll deal with him. I waited for the click that meant I was on the line with Greg. Greg? Hello, buddy. I've been trying to call you since... I didn't dare say these words out loud. Ever since I found out my wife slept with that idiot. Yes, I had a lot to think about. I could hear the anger still simmering beneath his calm demeanor. Even over the phone, his emotions were transmitted right through. So, do you want to talk? I heard him chuckle on the other end of the line. It sounded like a snort. Why do I want to talk to you, Richard? Good buddy. So you can post it online? Does your exciting story need a sequel? Do inquiring minds want to know what happened next to the idiot who couldn't satisfy his wife? Can't your loyal fans just wait to see how my fucking life turns out? Crap. Fine. He read my story. Now he's not only angry at his cheating wife, her cheating best friend, and her Neanderthal lover, but he's angry at me too. Great. Greg and I went to high school together. He played baseball, I played football. We were still connected to each other and formed a friendship that lasted for many years. When we left school, we lost touch with each other for a while. He went straight to college, and I joined the Air Force. After graduating from high school, he returned to our hometown and got a job as a manager at Olive Garden. Sounds like a waste of a college degree, right? That's what I told him. However, he was persistent. He was soon promoted. He excelled at any job he was given. His numbers always looked good. He had an excellent business mind. Soon enough, he became a district manager in charge of several restaurants. His salary now rivaled mine. Almost. I was honorably discharged from the Air Force after 10 years. I immediately took a job with a company that has contracts with the military. Long story short, I returned to my hometown, reconnected with Greg, and our friendship resumed as if there had never been a break. So, my good friend was furious. On me. Not good. Greg. Normally I would try to make a witty joke to soften the situation, or at least ease the tension. Unfortunately for me, it was quite obvious that, in this situation, it would actually be counterproductive. I especially liked the ending. He interrupted me. All I could do was shut the fuck up and let him talk. You know where I put my tail between my legs and ran away from there like a bitch? A very nice touch. His sarcasm seeped into my ear. At that moment, I truly felt like a shitty friend. I had no defense against this. Greg, where are you? We need to talk. You know what's funny, Richard? I've become really popular these days. Much more popular than I was before. It seems like everyone wants to talk to me. It must be my charming personality. It was then that I noticed that his voice was slurred. I heard the sounds of liquid being poured and hitting the glass walls of the glass. Greg, are you drunk? He laughed sardonically. No, Richard. I was drunk an hour ago. I can't tell you who I am now. Fine. I was a shitty friend. I admit it. Now it's time for me to fix it. Where are you, Greg? Just as I was asking this question, I was putting on my coat and grabbing my keys. I had a lot to do at work, but at the moment, it didn't matter. Fuck you, Richard. I won't tell you where I am. Don't you dare come to this bar looking for me. I'll fuck you up if you do that. The line went dead. However, it didn't matter. I knew exactly where he was. There were only a few bars in our city that were worth going to. Greg had his own favorite. At Mo, Part of it was because he was in love with the pretty barmaid there. She was one of those women who could flirt with you, but at the same time give the impression that she was completely unavailable. However, this did not hinder her popularity. She was still very easy on the eyes. When I walked in, my heart almost broke when I saw him sitting at the bar all alone. He was the only visitor there. Looking at my watch, I realized that it was just after noon. Karen waved to me when she saw me enter. I could see the compassion in her eyes as they met mine. "Does this handsome stallion belong to you?" She joked, but the smile did not reach her eyes. I nodded softly and tilted my head to the side, indicating that I needed her to disappear and give us a minute. "Greg." That was all I could get out. His fist slammed into me and I saw stars. Damn it! No wonder Dominic was hurt so badly. Before I knew it, I was on the floor, wiping blood from my lip. He stood over me, looking at me angrily. Finally, he shook his head and returned to his place at the counter. I got up from the floor and waved to Karen, who was clearing tables before Greg spotted me. Now she stood and looked at us with eyes as big as saucers. She started to approach before I waved and nodded, silently letting her know it was okay. She nodded in response and went back to clearing tables. "Now that you've gotten that out of the way, can we talk?" I asked, bravely sitting down next to him. He took another sip of his beer and shook his head. "Off the record?" he asked sarcastically. I laughed to myself. At least he still had his mind. This is a good sign, I think. In any case, this is already something. "Where you stopped?" "Mother," he said with disgust. "Do you and your mother get along? You met my mom, right?" "Yes, I still remember how she searched me to make sure I didn't bring no prohibited substances to her house. We laughed about it together." Greg took another sip and then looked me in the eyes. "For God's sake, Richard, it was humiliating enough to go through that shit, then read about it, to know that all my friends knew it was me. Greg, I just wrote it. Of course, I didn't want to humiliate you. Besides, no one will know it's you," I said, trying to convince myself as much as Greg. 2 cat women, Tarzan and a pirate. Not to mention the pirate who threw Tarzan into the wall. How many fucking Halloween parties do you think this happened at? Most of them are the same. Greg looked like he wanted to hit me again. "Do you think this is funny?" "Okay. Humor definitely won't work. Sometimes I can't help it." "You're right, Greg. I was an asshole. I am truly sorry for putting you in an awkward position." "Well, I'm not sorry for hitting you." I rubbed my chin and laughed. "You still hit like a bitch. No wonder you always got your ass handed to you when you boxed." This melted the ice, and then it continued to melt. I was able to get him away from Mo and into my car. Karen gave me a grateful look and hugged me as we left. "Take care of him, Richard. He's going through a lot." My jaw was throbbing and starting to swell, but I got to Greg, and that was what worried me the most. The moment I strapped him into my passenger seat, he was unconscious. It was as if he hadn't slept for days. Instead of taking him to his mom's house, I took him to mine. On the way, I called another friend, John. "How are you, Richie Rich?" he asked cheerfully when he picked up the phone. John was one of those guys who still thought he was in his 20s. Great guy, although very immature. I emphasize. Very, since most guys are at least a little immature. He's the one who started the whole Hulk versus Superman debate. He is always the life of the party. However, none of the wives really want their husbands to revolve around him. He had a habit of making his friends behave like teenage troublemakers. We all love him. "John, I need your help. I found Greg at Moe's. I may need your help to get him into my house and into bed. He is dead to the whole world." "Crap. I'm glad you found it. I've been looking for him all week. After what that bitch did to him, it's a wonder he didn't put a bullet in his head." John parked his Mustang behind my Tahoe in my driveway, and we set about the task of lifting 200 pounds of dead weight and placing it on the couch in my basement. Not an easy task. We talked for a bit, and he left after I promised to let him know what was going on. Since I returned home early, I had a quiet house all to myself. Believe me, this was rare. So rare that I found myself with nothing to do. I didn't want to leave the house in case Greg woke up. I didn't want him to get confused about where he was. So I grilled the steak on the George Foreman grill and baked the potatoes. Then I looked through my cable sports package to see if I could catch any good games, or at least interesting debates about good games. I finally settled on a documentary and started eating my gourmet meal. It wasn't long before my wife, Nikki, walked through the door with our kids in tow. "Darling, what are you doing at home so early?" she asked, kissing me on the cheek. The children ran upstairs. "I found Greg at Moe's, drunk as hell. I brought him here and lowered him to the basement." Her face immediately showed indecision. "Are you sure this is a good idea? I don't want any drunken behavior in front of the kids." "He'll be fine, honey. I'll make sure he stays in line." She stroked my cheek and I shuddered. That's when she noticed how swollen she was. "Richard, what the f... Did he do this?" "I'm fine, honey." "Forget about it, Rich. Get him out of here." "Honey, everything is fine. A man just found out that his wife was cheating on him just a couple of weeks ago. It happened so publicly that anyone would feel embarrassed. He's crazy. Plus, he went through it alone. I'm his friend. He had a lot of pent-up anger, and I didn't care if he took some of it out on me. Also, my jaw is not made of glass, like Tarzan's. He should really think about wearing a different suit next year." Nikki couldn't help but laugh at that. Seeing Tarzan get his ass kicked by a pirate was pretty funny. I don't think Jane would be too excited about it. Yes, Tarzan definitely got what he deserved. Dominic should spend less time pumping iron and more time hitting the bag. Nikki laughed. Or at least learn to dodge. We laughed together when she calmed down. One thing I've always adored about Nikki is her personality and sense of humor. This is one of the reasons why I can't stay mad at her for too long. I went downstairs to check on Greg. His thunderous snoring let me know that he was still very much alive in the sense that his heart was still beating, but essentially he remained functionally comatose. I put a pillow under his head when he made a sound that would wake the dead. His alcohol fumes would have killed everyone nearby. "What the fuck, Greg?" I muttered. The smell seemed to stick to me. I needed to get out of there. A few hours later, a zombie resembling my friend emerged from the depths of hell. His bloodshot eyes screamed death and decay as he shuffled around my kitchen. Nikki took one look at him and then gave me a silent warning that spoke volumes. "Keep him in line, or he's gone." I stood up and went to the kitchen to greet him. "How are you feeling, buddy?" "It's like my wife cheated on me, humiliated me in front of all our neighbors, and then ran over me with a truck." "At least your memory is intact." 2 out of 3 is not bad. His eyes narrowed. "My memory is fine. I remember your fucking story, too." "Do you remember how you hit me in the face for that?" I asked, rubbing my tender jaw. "This part seems vague. You may have to do this again just to be sure it was done." There was no real bite in his words, despite his stated desire to hit me again. I knew he wouldn't do it. "I've said this before, but I'm really sorry about this story, Greg. I didn't really think that many people would see where it was posted, and I didn't think that you would find out about it. I was wrong. People actually read it. I even received a message from a guy I know who heard about this party from someone. Then he read your story online." "Who was this guy?" "You do not know him. He's an obnoxious braggart named Harry. He lives in Virginia." I laughed out loud. "Do you know Harry Inva?" "So have you heard of him? Nice guy once you get over his attitude. By the way, he took my side and also thinks you're an asshole." Having said this, he smiled. "Yeah, well, I'm sure he thought that way before he read the story I wrote about you." Greg nodded and laughed. I gave him a friendly slap on the back. He didn't indicate that it was undesirable, so I knew we were fine. "Richard, why did you have to make me look like such a weakling?" "Did I really just up and run?" "Weakling?" "Greg, you took the guy down with one blow. I was afraid that you would bite his ear off. If you had boxed like this in college, you would have been a champion. Nobody thinks you're a weakling." "Fuck you. It was a hobby. I didn't lose the idiot. He grinned and shook his head. I really kicked his ass, didn't I? He added with humor. There was a mixture of pride and laughter in his voice. Hell yes. I bet your sweet ass couldn't do that, he said, playfully nudging me with his elbow. No, it would probably take me 2 hits. He couldn't help laughing. He laughed involuntarily. It was good to see. Rich, what happened after I left? I looked over my shoulder for a while, expecting to be taken to prison. Well, Greg, after you left? October 31st, after party. Alicia howled in despair as if she was being executed and collapsed to the floor. Loud sobs came from her slender body. Seeing Catwoman lying on the floor, broken, was a surreal sight. Nikki ran to her and helped her up. She led Alicia over to the couch and sat down next to her. Catwoman number 2, Susie, walked slowly down the stairs with a disgraced Tarzan. He held his head and his wife hugged him, directing his movement. Alicia saw them and became furious. She jumped up from the sofa and practically flew towards them. You fucking asshole! What did you told Greg? You ruined my life! You fucking asshole! Tarzan, who had already had his ass kicked by the pirate, was now dodging Catwoman's claws. Catwoman number 2 tried to get between them. Alicia, stop it! Stop that! Susie shouted, defending her husband. Tarzan being saved by a woman from a woman just added more fire to his punk ass. Can this idiot further embarrass the jungle man? You should have said something, right? You fucking asshole. You could not just accept no as an answer. What the hell is wrong with you? The jungle man looked at Alicia's fury with detachment. From the expression on his face, I realized that he did not understand everything yet. The knockout must have sobered him up. He was fully aware that he was the source of today's pain. Alicia, I'm sorry. I was drunk. She stopped trying to attack him and collapsed to the floor again. What should I do now, Susie? What should I do now? Back to the present, Richard's kitchen. After that, they had to drag Dominic to the emergency room. It turns out he had a concussion. He wanted to press charges, but Susie and Alicia talked him out of it. Alicia begged him not to do this. She knew that if you were arrested, there would be very little hope of your return. Greg chuckled and shook his head. In any case, there is little hope for this. I nodded my head sadly. So, Greg, what happened to you after you left? The only thing we heard was the sound of rubber hitting the road and the roar of your engine. I wanted to chase you, but my Tahoe was full of other cars. I was worried that you would have an accident. You haven't answered any of our calls. Yeah, well, I needed to get out of there and think. Understand? I couldn't come to terms with this. All our friends just look at me. They judge me. I needed space. So you went to your mother's house? It must have been pretty terrible for you to go back there. Yes. Well, life challenges you sometimes. The only way to deal with this is to do something you wouldn't do at any other time. Greg, October 31st, after party. Shit, shit, shit. This fucking bitch. Fuck these bitches. I drove manically along side streets that led outside the area. To be honest, I had no idea where I was going. Stop signs, speed limit signs, traffic lights. None of it mattered. I drove like I was the only one that mattered on the road. What was that sound? I turned my head and looked at the passenger seat. That's when I recognized it as the ringtone that plays when Alicia calls. Her beautiful face lit up the screen of my Android. She smiled at me, a loving smile frozen in time. I remember taking this photo. I was so happy, so full of love and adoration. Fucking lie. I had to fight the urge to throw my phone out the window. Her picture on the screen lied to me. If I answered it, the voice on the other end would lie to me. The happy, singing melody that announced her intention to contact me. Liar! Lie! 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 She slept with Dominic. She probably kissed him. A wet, passionate kiss that conveys excitement and lust. Crap! I bet the bastard loved it. Another man's wife slept with him. What right did he have? I'm the one who sat with her when she was sick. I was in the delivery room with her twice, holding her hand and wiping her sweat. I was the one who promised to love her in sickness and in health. I was the one who dedicated my life to her. The insistent ringtone continued to torment me with its lies. He stopped for a minute, only to start again. I turned it off and took out the battery. Silence. No more lies. I drove around the city aimlessly for what seemed like an endless amount of time. My body must have been on autopilot because my mind shut down to protect itself from being overloaded. Streaming video of tonight's events, and worse, the events I imagined happened between my wife and the jungle asshole, was driving my processor through overclocking. It wasn't until I looked up and saw my parents' garage in front of me that reality set in. I didn't remember driving here. Apparently, my subconscious took me back to the place of my childhood. I turned off the engine and went inside. Every child has a key to their parents' house, even if they have sworn never to return there again. Well, maybe not every child. But I did it. Because it was late, the living room in which I grew up was dark. In fact, nothing has changed over the past decades. The sofa, the coffee table, the lamp, all the contents were exactly the same furniture that I remembered, frozen in the same place. I could navigate with my eyes closed. Strangely, I found some comfort in this. That night changed everything for me in an instant. I've always been skeptical when people tell stories where their entire world changes in an instant, except in a tragic event, of course. This night made me a believer. Everything I knew about my life was turned upside down in one drunken conversation with a Neanderthal. Returning to the familiar environment in which I grew up made me feel stable. After an earthquake that destroys buildings and leaves the ground shattered, what people want most is for things to be calm. Stability is really what I needed at this moment. For now, I was safe at home. "Who's there?" I heard my mom call me. I pictured her crouched in the corner with a baseball bat, ready to beat the crap out of an unwanted visitor. "It's me, Ma." "Gregory?" "Yes." The light suddenly turned on, momentarily overloading my vision. I had to squint to avoid going blind. "Why in the name of all that is holy are you lurking around in the dark? Are you trying to kill me by giving me a heart attack?" "I'm glad to see you too, Mom." As my eyes adjusted, I was greeted by an elderly lady in floral pajamas. Her hair was tied up in curlers. "Why are you here so late, and why are you dressed like an idiot? Straight to the point, this is my mother." Until that moment, I had forgotten that I was still wearing most of my pirate costume. By this time, I had lost my hat, my parrot, and my eye patch. So now I just looked like, well, like an idiot. Long story, Ma. Listen, I'm going to stay here for a while. Tomorrow, the children will go home, but I will be back. I'll tell you about it, but I don't want to discuss it in front of the kids, okay? You'll notice that I didn't ask her to stay with her. I just let her know my intentions. This might seem a little strange to most people, but not to us. My family is not what you would call lovebirds. My old man is a straightforward guy. He never says more than is necessary and expects the same in return. The hug consisted of a brief push to the chest and a pat on the back. "I love you" was a term reserved for the experience when someone is dying. He and my mom were the perfect couple because she was exactly the same. She was very limited in the amount of affection she showed him, or for me. How they even got to each other's genitals to make me is a mystery that is both puzzling and disturbing at the same time. I honestly think there is no one else who could handle any of them. They were destined to find each other or suffer alone in this world. "Great, Gregory. You know where everything is?" I go back to bed. Her frail figure disappeared around the corner and up the stairs before she shouted, "And lock yourself up!" The next morning, I decided to activate the device that caused the vomiting and look at the damage. 29 missed calls, 15 from Alicia, a few from Richard and a few from others who were at the party. I didn't answer any of the calls. No doubt it was full of people who wanted to pump up watching adult films. The wife neglected the asshole for information about his whereabouts. After several hours of restless sleep, I was still in pain. I was still angry. I was confused. I'll admit, I was curious what the hell happened. but other emotions were overwhelming me. I also wondered where the cops were. I don't know what happened to Dominic after I left. Did he go to the hospital? Did he press charges? Am I going to go to jail? I rolled out of bed and slipped out of the house before my mom woke up. I wrote a note saying that I was leaving and that if Alicia called to tell her, I would call her when I was ready. She was free to take the children if she wanted. If not, I would bring them home later. Luckily, it was Sunday. I didn't need to be at work. This was good because I needed something liquid and strong. The pain from last night was sitting in my chest, and I needed something just as strong to numb it. So I parked outside my favorite bar and went inside. I spent the next couple of weeks hiding at my mom's house. During this time, the only contact I had with Alicia was when I brought the kids home and picked up a few things. After several stilted attempts at conversation, she left upset. Before I left, I heard her talking on the phone. My ears perked up as I listened for several minutes. If she had been on the phone with that asshole, I would have freaked out. Judging by her half of the conversation, it was Susie. Not sure if it was better or worse. I spent most of my free time between my parents' house and the bar. My dad was traveling on business, so it was just me and my mom. Oh, joy. She's really not one for deep conversations. To her credit, she really listened and was very supportive, but I don't think she really understood. Besides, I would never tell her about adult films, especially after all her warnings in my younger years about blindness and hairy palms. During my stay with my mother, we spoke very little. I gave her the general idea of why I am staying with her. She listened carefully, but said almost nothing about the situation. She asked me what I was going to do about it. The only answer I could give her was a shrug and, I don't know. You'll figure it out, was her encouraging word. Nothing more was said about this. Sounds pretty cold when I say it out loud. Surprisingly, in a way it was comforting. I didn't need to retell the course of events over and over again ad nauseum. She did not demand daily information about my state of mind and did not treat me like a fragile porcelain doll that needed to be coddled and protected. No time was taken to cheer me up. I was free to grieve on my own, in my own way. I took all my sick and personal days. I just couldn't face anyone. Even though no one from my work was at the party, we did live in a relatively small town. The word tends to travel at the speed of light, sound speed, the speed with which one gossiper reported to another. I wasn't just dealing with a cheating wife. This was how she destroyed me, publicly, in front of everyone. Poor Greg. He is too tired to make love to his wife, and yet he finds time to sit in front of his computer and watch adult movies every night. Maybe if you stopped looking for silicone Barbie dolls on the internet and paid more attention to your wife, she wouldn't have to cry to her best friend about her husband not being interested in her anymore. How do you come back from that? Eventually, I had to turn off my cell phone. The damn thing was suddenly having problems with shit. Out of nowhere, he called and called and called. Different faces lit up, begging me to pick up the phone. Fuck them all. I don't know if it was the universe's concern for me or Dominic's simple male pride, but the cops never showed up. It was interesting to see how my friends behaved. They emailed a lot. They even called. But they didn't come to my parents' house. I've come to realize that when people don't know what to say, they simply avoid the situation. They weren't bad friends, but they had no idea what was going on or how to help, so they didn't do anything. It was as much a curse as it was a blessing. Since there was nothing to distract me, I thought about it all the time. The only way I could stop was to drown out the terrible images running through my head, so I drank at the bar. Karen became my goddess, and also my savior. The worst thing about staying with my mother was that I was driven away from my children. It was an exile of my own making, but it still sucked. I knew that seeing them meant seeing Alicia. It was like I knew there was a warm bed waiting for me, but I had to swim across a half-frozen lake to get there. So I drank even more to forget about it. It wasn't until Karen showed me a story written by a good friend that I broke that pattern. Caught Catwoman, that's what it was called. A story that bore striking similarities to my script. 2 Catwoman, pirate, damn Tarzan, Superman versus Hulk. Here you go, bastard. I pulled out my cell phone, turned it on, and angrily dialed 7 digits. Good morning, Mr. Kirkson's office. This is Betty. How can I help you today? Richard. Today, at Richard's house. So what are you going to do with Alicia? Divorce? Parting? Beat the crap out of her? Greg let out a quiet, sad chuckle and looked at the plate in front of him. Do I have to choose? He joked without much enthusiasm. I saw the pain written on his face. I saw him replaying the events that happened on Halloween over and over again in his mind. Listening to her words, it was as if they were repeating themselves. Greg, I have to ask, you can tell me to go to hell if this is too personal, but about an adult movie. What did she mean by that? Greg's cheeks turned red and he shifted nervously in his chair. So what? I sometimes watch such films, but it's definitely not every day. Are you saying that she doesn't look, or that you don't look? He asked defensively. Of course I watch such films. But Alicia said you were looking at it instead of making love to her. This is true. Go to hell, Richard. It's too personal. Okay, buddy, fine. But I just want to understand what went wrong with you two. I mean, you guys were always so happy. I never suspected anything. He looked down at his food as his fork circled it around the plate. She just doesn't understand Rich. What doesn't she understand? Greg dropped his fork and rubbed his face with both hands, taking a deep breath. It was a sad sigh mixed with something else, maybe a feeling of guilt. I work 10 to 12 hours every day. If I'm lucky, I'll only work 5 days a week. When I come home, I'm tired. I'm stressed. I deal with angry investors, angry clients, angry managers, sexual harassment claims, discrimination claims, and everything in between. All this falls on me. If something happens in restaurants, like some idiot customer claims to have seen a rat and extorts us for free food, I have to deal with it. He took a breath, as if preparing to continue. I waited patiently for him to lay it all out. Alicia needs a lot of foreplay. I mean a lot. I have to spend 30 minutes just on foreplay. Then, when she's prepared and ready, we start having real sex. She likes to change positions often. On top of that, she wants me to talk dirty to her while all this is going on. I love my wife. I really think so. And when I have energy, it's great. I know guys who complain that their wife is frigid, or unimaginative, or just wants to get the hell over with. Alicia is none of those. But I don't have the strength to do this every night, especially after all the crap I have to deal with throughout the day. He paused and looked in a different direction. Rich, sometimes I just feel better when I'm alone. I hate to say this. I mean, every man dreams of a woman like Alicia, a horny woman who really loves sex. I'm lucky to have her, I know it, but I saw his eyes begin to cloud over. This can make it difficult to overcome the pain caused by marriage. It's hard to see the role you played in your predicament. I do so much for her. For girls. I work my ass off to give them everything I didn't have as a child. My dad is very frugal. He only bought me what I needed. I want more for my girls. And then there is my wife, and I enjoy spending time with them. They are my world. But sometimes I just wish I could not do something for someone else. When I come home after dealing with all the crap I deal with at work, I don't always want to be a dad, or a husband, or a boss. I think I missed it a little. How long has it been since you two made love? I mean, before the party. He shook his head. I don't know, Rich. I really do not know. I didn't even realize that so much time had passed. I nodded as some understanding dawned on me. Then I saw anger flash in his eyes. That doesn't give her the right to do what she did, although, Richard... I didn't humiliate her in front of everyone. I didn't sleep with another woman. She should have come to me with our problems. Why didn't she come to me? I had to take a chance with my next statement. It was important to get my point across to him without making him feel like I was taking her side. Maybe for the same reason you never told her why you watch adult films. Communication is hard, especially if you don't realize you need to say something in the first place. How do you tell your spouse that you are unhappy? Easily. You say, I'm unhappy. Touché. Everything was going too far. Usually at such moments I throw in a joke, so I switched modes. So, Greg, About my wall? He looked at me and saw that I was teasing him. He smiled and shook his head. Consider us even for this story, idiot. I thought the blow to the face had leveled us off. Not even close. I had to laugh. This look at Greg as he was before Halloween was refreshing, even if it only lasted a moment. Fair enough. That's when I saw Nikki standing in the doorway with a strange look on her face. Her eyes told me to see her immediately. I left Greg to eat and walked over to her. We have a problem. What's the matter, dear? She looked at me nervously and pulled me closer to her so she could whisper. Somehow, Alicia knew Greg was here. She is on her way. Fucking John. He probably called her to yell at her or do something stupid like that. He unwittingly provided her with information about Greg's whereabouts. You need to stop that bitch at the door, Nikki. Nikki raised her hands and shook her head. Rich, I'm not going to get involved in this shit. Greg needs to deal with this. He had been avoiding her for 2 weeks. I found myself becoming angry with my wife. He cheated on him. Have you forgotten about this? No, I haven't forgotten. I have a fucking hole in the wall as a reminder. I turned to look at Greg, who was absent-mindedly playing with the food on his plate. He seemed oblivious to the kamikaze mission that was preparing to ambush him. What do you want me to do, Nikki? Her face softened along with determination when she saw my desire to help my friend. He has to deal with this himself, baby. You can be his friend and help him get through this, but he can't escape it. She patted my chest and left. I turned to prepare Greg for what was to come. Greg, I heard you guys. You can't fucking whisper. She's on her way. He rubbed his chin and winced. Then a look of determination appeared on his face. Fine, he said finnily, moving away from the table. He turned to me and looked into my eyes. I'm ready to deal with this, he said decisively. He then stood up and walked out my back door. Greg, beautiful sunset. Soft colors cascaded across the pale sky. Orange, red, and all shades in between. So serene, almost calming. Greg, honey. The serenity disappeared. I did not answer the alarmed voice that announced the arrival of my cheating wife. I didn't even turn around to look at her. I just kept my eyes on the sky above me. Alicia took my lack of reaction as an invitation. She wasn't completely wrong for doing so. She sat next to me on Richard's back porch and pulled her knees to her chest as if for protection. I've been looking everywhere for you, honey. She couldn't have chosen a worse way to start this all off. I was in the same place all night. I muttered it under my breath, deliberately repeating the exact words I'd told her when I caught her and Dominic snuggled together in Richard's kitchen a couple of weeks ago. She looked at me a little confused, as if she didn't understand my answer. Greg, we need to talk. I nodded my head in agreement with her. Out of my peripheral vision, I could see her agony. I didn't look her directly in the face, but it seemed to me that it was a depressing sight. Swollen eyes, flushed cheeks, a sullen expression. At least that's what her voice sounded like. I love you, honey. It's a lie, I interrupted her. Greg. Stop it, Alicia. Just stop it. You can't love me and humiliate me the way you did. Putting our relationship on public display like this? I would never do that to you. What are you talking about, Greg? You did this to me. I heard the growing anger in her voice. You rushed down the stairs like crazy. Then, in front of everyone, you asked Susie if she knew I was sleeping with her husband. In front of everyone's eyes. If you wanted to talk privately, you would have pulled me out of there and yelled at me in the car. But no, you were the first to put my shit on the air. In a way, she was right. I didn't see things that way when it happened. I was blinded by rage. Okay, Alicia. I agree with this statement, but I didn't start this. Your fucking boyfriend confronted me and started telling me what a lewd girl you were to him in front of other people. I dealt with it the best I could. I was furious. Fucking justified anger. Could I have handled this differently? I paused to control my emotions. But I didn't cheat with anyone, I continued. You didn't have a woman who would come up to you and shove my betrayal in your face. I looked her straight in the face. I saw the anger drain away. He was replaced by remorse and guilt. I know, Greg. I just shook my head. Do you know Alicia? Do you really think so? I saw her eyes light up again. You may not have physically deceived me, Greg, but you weren't with me. Do you remember last night when I asked you for sex? And you? I shook my head. It was on my birthday. I bought myself some beautiful lingerie from Victoria's Secret. It was damn sexy. I bathed in the fragrant bubbles in the bathtub, getting wet, thinking about the night ahead. I rubbed my whole body with lotion that smelled like eucalyptus. I spent an hour doing my hair and makeup. Do you remember that night? I actually remembered that night. That was the day I had to fire Frank. He was my good friend. He was one of my assistant managers when I managed Olive Garden. Over the years, we have become good friends. When I got up, I picked it up. He was accused of sleeping with one of his subordinates. I defended him fiercely. I just knew he would never do anything so reckless. However, the girl had text messages. Damn text messages. When they were born, I was gone. I was the one who promoted him. I was the one who supported him. I was the only one who had to deal with it. Or they would deal with me. So, as you can imagine, I wasn't in the best mood that evening. But I didn't forget about her birthday. I made a reservation at her favorite restaurant. I was ready to dine out. However, the only thing Alicia wanted that night was dessert. You and I went to dinner for your birthday, and then we made love that night, Alicia. I remember this. She shook her head sadly. We had sex, Greg. You couldn't even enjoy it. Then, when I tried to hug you, you pushed me away and said you were tired. That's why I gave you space. Her voice caught in her throat, and she swallowed to clear her throat. I knew she wasn't finished yet, so I waited for her to continue. Then I woke up in the middle of the night. I saw you in front of your computer. I saw you watching adult films and satisfying yourself. The words came out of her with force. Then she gave up. Her body shook as she tried to cry silently, but to no avail. I sat next to her, unable to utter a word. I began to gain some level of understanding. Hearing her, understanding her point of view on things, opened my eyes. Until tonight, she was an evil cheater. Now I wasn't sure who she was. I understand, Alicia. Okay, I took you for granted. Do you really understand this, Greg? Do you know how much this devastated me? Do you know how painful it is to realize that, at your best, you are not woman enough to satisfy your husband? I don't think you know. After that, I told myself that I will no longer ask you for sex. I wanted you to ask me for this, but you never did. So that's why you slept with Dominic? Did he make you feel like a woman? She sniffled next to me and wiped her nose on her sleeve. Yes, Greg, he and Susie did it. Damn it! Susie and I got drunk once in high school. We did something that night. In the morning, we were so embarrassed. We just blamed it on the alcohol and pretended nothing happened. Well, a little over 10 years later, I come to her in tears. A few weeks later, feeling like the most inferior woman on earth, I came to her house. I felt so depressed, so broken. I told her I needed to get drunk, and we drank. The feeling of inferiority began to mask itself, but it did not disappear. And how did you end up in bed with her and Glass Joe? Dominic came home from work and found us completely drunk. Susie told him about my problems. He started telling me how beautiful I was, how sexy he saw me. Susie told him that she agreed with him. That's when the story about us in high school came out. He got so excited about it. He told us to kiss. We were so drunk that we did it. It all started with a playful kiss, but before I knew it, we were already kissing. When I finally broke the kiss, I turned and saw him next to me. When he leaned in, I didn't resist. From that moment on, everything only escalated. How many times have you had sex with them? She turned to look at the now dark sky above us and whispered, "Twice." It hurt. The drunk incident was bad enough. I could recover from this blow, but knowing she was back again was something else entirely. So, at the party, in the kitchen, what did you and Dominic talk about? Her eyes flashed with anger and a little guilt as she remembered it. He was drunk. He was telling me how sexy my costume was and that he wanted me to come over to their house that night to have some fun. I was afraid that someone would overhear us, so I tried to get him to shut up. I told him that I had made a mistake and that the three of us couldn't do this anymore. Then he started to get a little aggressive. He started rubbing against me. That's when you came over. Yes. I gathered my panties in a pile. Isn't that what you told me? She bit her lip and shook her head. I was angry, Greg. Seeing Dominic pester me like that reminded me that you didn't value me. Were you planning on going to his house later to have some fun? Since he appreciated you. She shook her head and looked into my eyes. No, I was hoping you would finally ask me. I chose the Catwoman outfit because I knew you liked Michelle Pfeiffer in Batman Returns. You once told me about how you fell in love with her because of that suit. I saw your eyes when you looked at me in it. I saw that you finally desired me. Me. I almost missed the party altogether to get what I had been craving for so long. I wish I could do that. I was hoping that when we returned home, you would take me. And then Dominic happened. She said his name as if she were spitting it out. Well, this wouldn't have happened if you hadn't slept with him. Why didn't you just talk to me, Alicia? She shook her head sadly again and sniffled. I don't know, Greg. I wish I knew that. God knows why I didn't do it. Well, I guess there's enough guilt here to beat around the bush. She turned to me with hope in her eyes. So what do we do now, Greg? I do not want to lose you. I love you so much. I would give anything for us to get through this. My head was spinning. Can I get through this? Could I forgive my wife, given that I played a role in our misfortune? Leave the past in the past? I don't know, Alicia. So much has happened. It would take a lot for us to begin to heal from this. A glimmer of hope grew stronger within her. She wiped away her tears and grabbed my hand. Cute. I'll do anything. Please, give me a chance to prove to you how much I love you. I looked into her eyes and saw hope. I started to feel it too. It would take a long time, but it was possible that we could heal each other. If we both fought long and hard enough, we would have a chance. Okay, Alicia. But this will require several things. First, we have to go to a consultation. It's simply necessary. Obviously, we still have a lot to work through. We need to figure out how to communicate with each other. She kissed me on the cheek and hugged my neck. Yes, honey, whatever you say. Secondly, you should stop being friends with Susie. That's when I saw the light go out in her eyes, and I felt it die in my heart. What did you say? I said you should stop being friends with Susie. Greg, why are you asking me to do this? I leaned back in my chair and looked at her incredulously. You can't be serious, Alicia. You cheated on me with her and her husband. What do you think I'll do about it? Just trust that it won't happen again? Every time you were with her or talked to her, don't you know what I would be thinking? How can I be healed if this salt is rubbed regularly into my wound? She pushed me away as if I had slapped her. Her eyes filled with new tears. The seconds ticked by, and we just looked at each other. You want me to choose between my best friend and my husband? I can't do this, Greg. Please don't make me do this. I cannot describe the pain that ran through me at that moment. Strangely, it was actually worse than the pain of catching her cheating. This time, there was no rage to disguise it for me. I felt my heart squeezing in my chest, crushed by the weight of the realization that it was too much to bear. The fact that she couldn't choose me over her best friend was crushing, all-consuming, a catastrophe on the level of extinction. The woman I loved most in the world did not love me the same. I was not her one and only love. I was one of them. I shared the throne in her heart with another. Dominic faded into the background. Now I didn't care about him. He was the least of my problems. Greg, please don't. Make your choice, Alicia. Alicia couldn't break her ties with Susie. This connection was obviously too strong. It rivaled her love for Greg, so much so that she was unwilling to give it up even at the cost of her marriage. Sadly, they divorced a little less than a year later. It took so long because Alicia did everything in her limited power to stop it, even to such an extent as to humiliate her dignity. I never thought I'd see someone as proud as her do this, but she came to his work and begged him not to leave her. In front of everyone. I begged him. It was a heartbreaking plea that made everyone who witnessed it feel uneasy. Even I secretly hoped that he would give her another chance. But Greg couldn't bear to see her around him again, as long as she refused to give up on her friend. He felt that he should not share his throne in her heart. In essence, he was right. Neither spouse should share. Now, a year later, the wounds are still deep. There was no winner here. The two of them cope with the children as best they can. They try not to put each other down in front of their children. However, I have endured many nights as a shoulder for my friend to cry on. However, one good thing happened. This Halloween, he brought a girl to my party. She wasn't dressed like Catwoman. She may be a rebound girl and not his next great love, but finding a rebound is still a step forward. In real life, people don't just experience the loss of love. This is a step-by-step process. The heart heals gradually, not immediately. Alicia, Dominic, and Susie didn't come to the party. They stopped communicating with the rest of us. Susie still stands by her friend and still accuses Greg of being unfair and trying to force her to make an impossible choice. In my opinion, this choice was not so impossible. Alicia just didn't want to be married as much as a loving wife should. She said she was ready to do anything. It's funny how people throw around words like that. Do anything. But what they really mean is that they will do whatever they want. I'm sure she was ready to act as his sex slave or play a loving housewife. But when it cost her something important to her personally, her marriage wasn't worth the sacrifice. In my opinion, he is better off without her. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.